Hello to everyone. We're very pleased to be with you here today and tell you about Jan. My name is Melanie Whetzel, and I'm a senior consultant on the cognitive neurological team. And I also have Elisabeth Simpson here with me. She's a consultant on both the motor and the sensory team.
Hi, everyone.
All right, we're going to start out here with giving you an overview of what we're going to do today. We're going to briefly tell you about Jan and the services we provide. Next, we'll cover various situations and solutions that will illustrate the many accommodation options available to employees and employers. We'll also share information from a study that describes employer satisfaction with and the effectiveness of accommodations. And of course, we'll have time at the end of the webcast to answer any questions you may have. The Job Accommodation Network, better known as JAN, is a leading source of free, expert, and confidential guidance on workplace accommodations and disability employment issues, working towards practical solutions that benefit both the employer and the employee. JAN helps people with disabilities enhance their employability and shows employers how to capitalize on the value and talent that people with disabilities add to the workplace. Consultants offer one-on-one guidance on workplace accommodations, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, and related legislation such as the Rehabilitation Act. We also provide information on self-employment and entrepreneurship options for people with disabilities. From Fortune 500 companies to entrepreneurs, Jan has served customers across America and around the world for over 25 years. Jan represents the most comprehensive job accommodation resources available. Our consultants are thought leaders and innovators on disability employment issues and have all earned at least one master's degree in their specialized fields, ranging from rehabilitation counseling to education and engineering. Our services are free the first time you contact us and every time after that. And although we're located on the beautiful campus of West Virginia University, we are a national service. Jan is very easy to use and offers several ways to obtain confidential, personalized assistance anytime, anywhere. Get your questions answered by toll-free phone calls that include TTY. Visit the web for more than 200 disability-specific publications, as well as the searchable online accommodation resource, which is better known as SOAR, that enables you to explore accommodation options for different disabilities and workplace settings. JAN's on-demand online service provides customers with individualized email and chat responses to questions about accommodations and the ADA. Connect with Jan through Twitter, Second Life, Facebook, and other social networks. Jan also delivers training workshops at events sponsored by corporations, organizations, and federal, state, and local governments, and webcasts, just like today. Consultants at Jan answer questions and offer assistance to employers, individuals, service providers, and others, including parents who might call with questions about a child, an adult child, or an adult child calling for ways to assist a parent, other family members, union representatives, as well as medical professionals and attorneys. Consultants at Jan specialize in specific areas and work on teams. When you call, you'll speak to a program assistant who will direct you to the appropriate team and team member for the particular disability and situation you're calling for assistance with. We have the motor team that assists callers with disabilities such as back, neck, shoulder, and leg impairments, as well as other mobility issues, arthritis, heart conditions, and multiple sclerosis. The sensory team works with individuals with hearing, vision, and speech impairments, as well as allergies, asthma, and other respiratory impairments. The cognitive neurological team consults with callers on mental health impairments such as depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety and panic disorders, as well as learning and intellectual disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, attention deficit and attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, as well as autism spectrum disorders, including Asperger's syndrome. And our entrepreneurship team assists those callers who need information and resources on small business and self-employment options. This slide gives you an indication of the number of contacts that Jan takes care of a year. We have 40,554 contacts, and almost 15,000 of those were electronic. And we also had 3,200,000 web page requests. Jan was established in 1983 as a free national service and continues to function that way today. We specialize in job accommodations and the employment provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Consultants can assist callers at any point in the interactive process, from explaining what the process includes to helping pinpoint and solve difficulties at specific steps. We can answer specific questions and give targeted technical assistance, as well as provide comprehensive resources. All calls are confidential, so callers can freely explore their options. Our database is not connected to the federal government, and we do not report information to other agencies. As was pointed out earlier, there are numerous ways to get in touch with Jan. You can communicate using the phone, chat, you can text, use TTY, relay, email, and social networks. We offer live and archived training, just like this you're receiving today through this webcast, and we work as your partner in the employment and retention of employees with disabilities. The Job Accommodation Network works in partnership and collaborates with the following agencies and groups: the Computer Electronic Accommodation Program, which is known as CAP, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, known as the EEOC, the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, the U.S. Business Leadership Network, the National Association of ADA Coordinators, SIGDA Insurance, Kaiser Permanente, the Multiple Sclerosis Society, and the DIBTECs, which are Disability and Business Technical Assistance Centers, as well as state vocational rehabilitation agencies. All right, and now I'm going to turn this over to Elisabeth.
Thanks, Melanie. Now we're going to spend some time reviewing with you the types of accommodations an employer may have to provide, as well as some actual accommodation situations that Jan consultants have assisted with. Melanie and I are going to be switching back and forth between the different types of accommodations, but I'll go ahead and get us started. So let's start with the reasonable accommodation of purchasing or modifying equipment or products. In many cases, equipment or products end up being involved in a successful accommodation. So at Jan, we have extensive knowledge about modifying equipment employers might already have, as well as information about where to purchase new products, such as the examples shown on the current slide. These are just a few examples, and believe me, there are thousands of products that can be used as possible accommodations. The first product shown on the slide is a watchminder. This device can be set to alert individuals with intellectual or cognitive impairments who may have limitations in adaptive skills, such as self-initiating tasks. For example, alerting an individual when a task needs to be completed at a certain time at work. Another product shown on the slide is a portable TTY. This is a telephone system for people who have hearing loss or difficulty speaking. We're actually getting a lot fewer questions about TTYs because more people are starting to use relay systems, including video relay, which allows users to actually see the relay operator and sign back and forth using sign language. The third product I want to mention is a refreshable Braille display for an individual who is blind, knows Braille, and wants to convert what is on the computer screen to Braille. And then we have an assistive listening device called a portable or personal FM system. These devices transmit sound directly to an individual who is wearing a sound receiver, such as a hearing aid, headphone, or a neck loop. Assistive listening devices reduce problems associated with background noise in one-on-one and group communication. The personal systems, such as the one shown here, are very small and portable and involve the use of a small microphone and receiver. The final product shown is a portable handheld scanner, or a reading pen. This product scans single words or full lines of text and reads the text out loud, and it's portable. A reading pen is a device that can help readers improve their reading skills and is designed to accommodate people with reading difficulties, such as dyslexia. Most of these products are simple, low-cost examples of accommodations. Really, they are ways to increase productivity regardless of whether you use the word accommodation or not. So what could be an example of an accommodation where equipment or a product was purchased? Here in this first situation, we have a teacher who used a wheelchair and was unable to reach up high enough to write on the chalkboard and whiteboard. In this case, the teacher was allowed to enter the information into a laptop computer that was linked to a projection system. The information was projected onto a screen or wall, taking away the need for the teacher to write on the board.
Okay, here we have making the work site accessible, and those accommodations can include parking, a small threshold ramp for better maneuvering through doorways, and automatic door openers. The first example here is a purchasing clerk in a manufacturing plant that had diabetes and had to have one of his legs amputated. He was having difficulty walking from the parking lot to his workstation. The employer accommodated this employee by giving him a reserved parking spot close to the worksite.
Job restructuring is another type of accommodation we can discuss with you. Now, this is an accommodation that doesn't necessarily involve products. Job restructuring may be needed when an individual is having difficulty performing some functions of a job and requests that the employer restructure the job as an accommodation. Under the ADA, job restructuring is only something that an employer has to consider if the problematic work function is marginal, not essential. When an employer removes a marginal function, the employer may choose to give the employee with a disability a different marginal function that he is able to perform in exchange for the function being removed. Let's say, for example, that a secretary has difficulty lifting up large boxes of computer paper, and it's not an essential function of the job. The employer might ask someone else to do the lifting and then have the secretary do extra mailing or copying instead. In our next example, we have a situation where an employer required all employees to work overtime. This is something we may be hearing about now with the holiday season approaching and stores extending their hours. In this case, we had an employee who requested to be excused from working overtime because of cancer and fatigue. In this case, the employer denied the request, stating that overtime is an essential function of the job. Now, overtime is another reasonable accommodation situation that should be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and it's something we can discuss with you if you need our guidance and assistance.
All right, modifying a schedule and allowing leave time are both accommodations that can be provided as long as they don't cause a hardship to the employer. A schedule can be modified in various ways, from adjusting the starting and ending times of a shift to changing a 10-hour work week to a 5-hour work week, or vice versa. Leave as an accommodation can be very flexible as well, from needing intermittent time off for medical appointments to more extended leave for medical treatments such as chemotherapy. Here's an example where an employee who works in a call center has a gastrointestinal disorder and has asked to take frequent bathroom breaks. Productivity is measured by the number of calls taken. The employer continued to require all employees to meet productivity standards, but was able to accommodate this employee with a cordless headset and a workstation that was closer to the restroom.
Another type of accommodation we can help with is modifying a workplace policy. I think this is a tricky area because while employers are free to set policies, there are some policies they may have to modify for an employee with a disability. Examples of policies that employers might have to consider modifying can include dress codes, rules about eating at your desk, and attendance policies. Policies that employers don't have to consider modifying include respecting coworkers and customers, observing safety rules, and prohibiting violence, threats of violence, stealing, destruction of property, the use of alcohol or illegal drugs at work, and sending inappropriate or offensive emails. We can provide information to help determine what policies employers must consider modifying, what policies employers can enforce, and how to develop non-discriminatory policies. Moving on to our next example, here we have an employee with high blood pressure who was having difficulty dealing with stress in the workplace. The employee decided to train his own service dog to alert him when he is reacting to stress and to help calm him down during times when he is experiencing stress. As an accommodation, the employer modified the no animal policy that was in place and allowed the service dog in the workplace.
All right, providing readers and interpreters can also be considered a reasonable accommodation. In this example, we have a job applicant for a dog warden position for city government who has dyslexia and could not pass a required written test. Because the applicant was able to submit the required paperwork that documented the learning disability, the employer provided a reader for the testing.
And our next accommodation option is reassignment. Reassignment is an accommodation we term the accommodation of last resort, unless the employer and employee agree that it is the most effective option. Employers are expected to try to accommodate in the current job, but sometimes it's not doable and sometimes it's not effective. If that's the case, then possibly looking at reassignment to another position might be the reasonable accommodation needed. Here we have our example of this type of accommodation, and this case is actually a pretty interesting one. A retired Army medic had difficulty managing stress in the workplace due to her PTSD. Her stress intolerance was intensified when she heard the emergency medical helicopter arrive and depart from the hospital where she worked as a nurse. So, the nurse was reassigned to a vacant position on a unit that was far from the helipad, so she rarely heard the helicopter. During times when the helicopter staff would practice maneuvers in her area, she was allowed to work a flexible schedule. With increased communication among supervisors, the nurse was able to continue working and hoped to return to her previous position with time.
All right, next we have an example of an accommodation that just doesn't fit into any of the other categories. And this is one of my favorite accommodation examples. Here we have an airline employee with breast cancer who returned to work but started experiencing problems related to lymphedema. She had to rotate to various workstations and use a computer at each station. Because she did not stay at one workstation, her employer brought in someone to train about proper ergonomics so the employee and the others could work comfortably. Each workstation was equipped with an adjustable keyboard and mouse tray, a monitor riser, and telephone holder. What started out as an accommodation for one employee ended up being adjustments made to all of the workstations that would benefit all of the employees. With all the questions we receive and with the recent amendments to the Americans with Disabilities Act, refocusing attention on workplace accommodations, some employers that we speak with express concerns about the cost of providing job accommodations. So in addition to providing guidance on what accommodations are possible, Jan also looks into the business side of workplace accommodations and conducts a study that shows that job accommodations not only are low cost, but also positively impact the workplace in many ways. We actually researched data from 5 different groups: employers, professionals such as service providers, individuals, those interested in self-employment, and others who contact Jan. The cost-benefit data are most often available from employers, so we analyzed these data on a yearly basis. Employers who contacted Jan were asked if they would be willing to participate in a user satisfaction survey. Approximately 8 weeks after their initial contact, the employers were asked a series of questions about the situation they discussed with Jan
and the quality of services Jan provided. What is the bottom line? Workplace accommodations are low cost and high impact, and Jan can help employers make them free of charge. To keep up to date on this research, you can visit our A to Z topics page, which is available from the Jan homepage. You can find the fact sheet series by going to either the benefits or the cost link. The Jan study has been ongoing since 2004, and in total, the Jan follow-up survey included 1,182 employers interviewed between January of 2004 and December of 2006, and 603 employers interviewed between June 28th of 2008 and July 31st of 2011, for a grand total of 1,785 employers. There were a number of findings that have come from the study, the first being that employers want to provide accommodations so they can retain valued and qualified employees. More specifically, of the employers who contacted Jan for accommodation information and solutions, 82% were doing so to retain or promote a current employee. On average, the employees had been with the company about 7 years, with an average wage of about $14 for those paid by the hour, or an average annual salary of about $49,500. This data includes those persons who had just been given a job offer or who were newly hired. In addition, the individuals tended to be fairly well educated, with 45% having a college degree or higher. What else did this data show? The second finding showed that most employers report no cost or low cost for accommodating employees with disabilities. More specifically, the employers in the study reported that a high percentage, 56% actually, of accommodations cost absolutely nothing to make, while the majority of the rest, or 38%, typically cost only $500, and these were one-time costs. Only 4% of employers surveyed reported an ongoing annual cost with the company, and 2%, a very small percentage, reported that the cost was a combination of one-time and annual. The study's third finding showed that the employers report that accommodations being provided are effective. Of those responding, 76% reported the accommodations were either very effective or extremely effective. Certainly this is an important success rate for both individuals who are remaining employed and employers who are able to keep valued employees. The fourth finding in this study was that employers experience multiple direct and indirect benefits after making accommodations. In this next slide, we've included the direct benefits that employers reported, which are the company retaining a valued employee, the employee's productivity increased, there were no costs for training a new employee, the employee's attendance increased, there was an increase in the company's diversity, the employer saved on workers' compensation costs or other insurance costs, the company hired a qualified person with a disability, and the company promoted an employee. The indirect benefits are the ones that I like to share with the employers who express concerns about providing an accommodation, because they aren't always expecting to hear these. The indirect benefits that were found in the study include improved interactions with coworkers, increased overall company morale, increased overall company productivity, which is a big concern for employers, improved interactions with customers, increased workplace safety, increased overall company attendance, increased profitability, and increased customer base. And our final finding that we wanted to discuss with you today was that employers find Jan helpful during the accommodation process. In fact, 98% of employers found that Jan understood their needs. 93% of employers stated that the information Jan sent them met their needs. 99% of employers stated that they would use Jan again. These numbers are something that we really take to heart, and we continue to work hard and strive to provide a good service to anyone who contacts us. So, to wrap it up, the Jan study results consistently showed that the benefits employers receive from making workplace accommodations far outweigh the costs. And now you all have the knowledge to share this information with others.
Here we have another great accommodation. A cookie maker with an intellectual disability cannot count, but must bake cookies in sets of 12. The employer provided a 12-hole plastic template, which is inserted on the cookie sheet during preparation, but removed before baking. The employee can use the template as a guide, filling every hole in the template with cookie batter, ensuring that she makes 12 cookies every time.
In this next example, we have a receptionist in a large office who is experiencing difficulty remembering faces and names of staff and keeping track of the in-out status of the case managers. The accommodation provided was one that I would say is more on the low-tech end of the accommodation spectrum, and in this case, a Velcro in and out board was provided with the photo and name of each case manager. When staff would enter or leave the building, they would prompt the receptionist as to their status, and he would then move their photo from the in to the out column, or vice versa. This allowed him to keep track of the status of the case managers and better serve clients who were trying to contact them.
And here we have an example of a city employee with a sleep disorder who was consistently tardy for work due to taking public transportation. Driving was not safe for him with this disorder. The employer flexed the individual schedule to accommodate for variations in public transportation schedules.
In this example, a newly hired financial aid counselor at a college felt she could perform the essential functions of the job with no problems. The difficulty was actually with the training she was required to complete as a new hire. Due to deficits in her short-term memory associated with a traumatic brain injury, this employee had difficulty moving through the modules at the pace the college had scheduled. The employer agreed to provide this employee with extended training and a more relaxed schedule for completion of the training as an accommodation. She was also provided extra time with the trainer, as well as materials to take home to study, and an extended time frame for completion of each module. In this situation, no cost was reported.
All right, and now we're going to have a quick little recap here of our JAN services. If you've been on the JAN website, you know how extensive the information is that we provide there. There are over 200 informative publications. SOAR, or the Searchable Online Accommodation Resource, helps you explore accommodation options on your own. The ADA Library helps you locate the most up-to-date information about the new ADA Amendments Act, as well as related legislation. The A to Z of disabilities and accommodations gives you the choice to search under various medical conditions and disabilities, as well as a myriad of topics. JAN On Demand is the online tool that helps you be more precise in your request for information. By answering the questions and including specific information, your inquiries can be more thoroughly answered by consultants. Search out JAN's many publications in Spanish. You can subscribe to our updates and get the most recent JAN and ADA news. JAN also has a live chat where you can hook up with a consultant for assistance. And if you follow social network sites, check out all the ways that you can connect with JAN. All right. Now, we're saving time here for questions. Do we have any questions?
Hi everybody, this is Rosemary. For any questions, feel free to use the chat box to enter your questions, or you can use your microphone headset by clicking on the F2 icon. And then when you're done speaking, just make sure that you click on the F2 again to turn off your mic. Thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and there's some common questions that we get as Jan consultants here, so I think maybe we'll take a moment and just kind of banter back and forth with some of these. So Melanie, I'm going to put you on the spot, and let's talk about whether it is the employer's obligation to make sure that the employee gets to work on time, and what type of accommodations the employer might be obligated to provide when it comes to an employee who's having trouble getting to work on time. So a transportation type question.
Okay. Generally speaking, the employer is not required to make sure that the employee gets to work on time. But if an employer's policy regarding work schedules creates a barrier for an individual whose disability interferes with his or her ability to commute to work, the employer would need to look at modifying the policy as a reasonable accommodation, unless that would pose an undue hardship. We saw earlier the example of an employee with a sleep disorder who wasn't able to drive and used public transportation to get to work. Since the set schedule circumstances are out of the employee's control, the employer may need to look at flexing that employee's schedule by allowing the employee to arrive at work between 8 and 8:30 and then leave between 5 and 5:30 instead of working the normal 8 to 5. What about an employee with ADD who says, I just can't get to work on time? An employer can have the same performance and conduct standards for an employee with a disability that he does for all employees, but may need to look at helping the individual get to work on time by offering a modified schedule, a shift change, or talking to the employee about using a watch or timer in the morning to help them pace themselves so they can get to work on time. We often talk to people that have epilepsy or seizure disorders, and sometimes an employee can work for years and have no problems, and for some reason start having seizures, and maybe their medication needs changed and they're not able to drive for a while. And that can be accommodated by allowing the employee to work from home if that's possible, if the job can be done from home. Obviously, if someone is a teacher or waitress, that can't be done from home. But again, looking at each situation case by case and looking at the job and how that job can best be done, it is the best way to look about accommodations.
Thanks, Melanie.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask Elisabeth one here.
All right.
Another question that's fairly common involves the amount of time that an employer has to respond to an accommodation request. Employees often ask about a time frame under the ADA for an employer to provide an accommodation. Is there a set amount of time that the audience should know about?
That's a good question. Actually, there is not a set amount of time that the EEOC has set, or the enforcing agency for the ADA has set out, that an employer has to respond to an accommodation request, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. There's no set amount of time. However, what the EEOC has said is that once an accommodation request has been submitted by an employee or whomever, that the employer needs to work as quickly as possible to start the interactive process, to get the ball rolling so that an accommodation can be provided, or there can be a discussion about maybe why the accommodation can't be provided, and other options can be evaluated by the employer and the employee. One thing that I suggest to individuals who contact me that have concerns about this is to keep their own timeline. Once you submit an accommodation request, mark it down on your calendar, or do whatever you need to do to keep note of when you actually made that request. And if you haven't heard anything from after a certain point, just follow up with the employer, make sure they've received the request, and ask about the status. Because even if there isn't a set time frame, it's good to continue to follow up on things. So,
okay, good answer.
Hey, Melanie, I've got another one for you if you're up for it.
Okay, all right.
Oh, do we have a question? And the question is Jan available to employees as well as employers? Absolutely. We get a lot of our calls do come from employers, both on the private and federal sector. It really doesn't matter who contacts us, though. We take all calls, and lots of our calls are from employees. So And you don't necessarily have to be employed. If you're looking for a job and are wanting some guidance on what an employer can talk to you about in an interview or disclosure or anything like that, feel free to contact us as well. So employees, employers, rehab professionals, attorneys, anybody who wants to contact us, we're going to talk to you.
All right. Does it require membership is a question that we have. Absolutely not. Jan is a free service. You can just pick up the phone and call. Oh gosh, we went through a lot of ways that you can get a hold of Jan. There's a chat. You can get online and look at that for yourself maybe first. Some people like to do that, and then if they have additional questions, they like to call and speak to a consultant in person. But there's no membership required, absolutely not. And the information that we take is strictly confidential, and it's just to help us keep track if you call a second time, that type of thing. So if you have any questions or thoughts or issues, please give us a call. There's no cost or membership involved.
All right, well, it doesn't look like we've got another question right on the board. So, Melanie, one of the questions we consistently get from employers is how to broach the subject of disability and ask if an employee needs an accommodation. Can you tell our audience about that?
Sure. You know, it's probably never a good idea to ask an employee directly about a disability unless the employer knows for certain that a specific disability exists. Even then, it would be better to address performance problems as exactly that, performance problems. A good practice when counseling an employee about a performance issue would be to simply ask, is there anything we can do to help you meet these performance goals? Or is there anything you need assistance with? And then that way the employee is free to disclose information about a disability or not, and that's totally up to the employee to decide that. And if you ask those questions, then the employer hasn't assumed that a disability is the cause of job difficulties. And even if you get the word from a pretty reliable source, it's still best to ask the employee about his or her performance. And one difference in this would be if the employer or supervisors actually witnessed the employee having certain difficulties. For instance, if somebody was fainting or having seizures or falling asleep, if you have a reason to believe a medical condition is causing the employee to have difficulties at work, you can request medical information, particularly if there are safety issues. For example, if you've noticed that an employee is very disorganized, having trouble maintaining focus and staying awake, you may not know whether this is a result of medication taken for mental health impairment, for example, or staying up late with a sick child. So the best thing to do would be to address the performance issues and ask if there's some way that you can assist the employee in getting the job done. On the other hand, if you have an employee who is a bus driver and has fainted several times in the last week, you may ask that they bring in medical documentation from their treating physician to help you determine if they are safe to perform their job.
Great, thank you.
All right. Do you have any more questions? All right. Here's another question I'm going to ask Elisabeth.
Okay.
Okay. What if an employee requests leave, but the employer knows of an accommodation that can be made so that the employee doesn't have to take leave? Can the employer provide the accommodation that would require the employee to remain on the job?
Actually, they can, yes. If an employer has a reasonable accommodation they can provide, and that accommodation would be effective, which is the important key to this, and providing that accommodation would eliminate the need for the employee to take leave, then an employer can require that the employee take the accommodation. Again, the key factor is that the accommodation being provided is effective. And in some cases, employees really need to take leave and they're unable to come to work. And if, let's say, the accommodation the employer presents would interfere with that employee being able to obtain medical treatment, for instance, that would not be an effective accommodation. However, if the employer, let's say they could provide the employee with part-time work and eliminate some marginal functions from the job, then the employee can come back to work, at the same time receive medical treatment. That's probably going to be considered an effective accommodation, and so the employee should be willing to look at that and take it. The employer can require that.
Okay. Wow, no more questions. Well, we've done a pretty thorough job, I think, of explaining the services of Jan and what we do. And again, if there are any questions that you think of later that we didn't answer, please give us a call. You can call and speak to one of us. You can email questions. You can do that. Our hours, let's talk about that. Our hours are from 9 to 6, and that's Eastern time. But you can email questions. You can get on the website 24/7 and look to see if the information that you need is available there. We have a wide variety of different medical conditions and disabilities, information on the accommodations, common accommodations that might be necessary for those conditions. And that's always a good place to start, to look at that and review that, and then if you need additional information, to get in contact with us here and speak to a consultant.